Second. Hi, everyone. We're just going to go a little bit slow for a minute or two, but I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on XR, AR, AI, and how they may affect human rights. And we have today our usual colleagues, organizations that help us with these webinars, but also two new ones for a webinar with Dr. Rosenberg. So we're eager to begin the discussion. Give us one more minute. Our two new organizing groups are the XR Safety Alliance and the Responsible Metaverse Alliance. So I am going to begin by welcoming Dr. Rosenberg. Hi.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And just a quick bio, Dr. Rosenberg is a longtime AR and XR researcher who earned his PhD from Stanford. He has been awarded over 300 patents for AI, XR, and VR technologies. And he is the founder of a number of companies, which include his current company, Unanimous AI. So one thing I want to say before we start is please put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. And also we very much want to hear from you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 20 to 25 minutes of a discussion between Dr. Rosenberg and myself. I'm Susan Aaronson, who directs the Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub. And then we're going to open up to your questions. So we really want you to ask them to Dr. Rosenberg. So let's begin. We're using the term metaverses instead of spatial computing or XR or AR and mixed reality. Okay, so we're going to use that rather than one single metaverse, so you don't get confused that we're talking about one particular company. Okay, so Dr. Rosenberg, the promise of these technologies is that they can augment human capability. And what's new about their combined and individual potential and threat to human rights?
Yeah, so we're now talking about the metaverse as a broad term to describe virtual reality, augmented reality, and some related technologies like artificial intelligence that'll have a big role in the metaverse. I think it's actually helpful to start and just answer the question, well, what is the metaverse? Because there's so many different definitions out there, and I actually like to keep it relatively straightforward and say I see the metaverse as the societal transition from a digital world that's currently based on flat media viewed in the third person to a digital world that's based mostly on immersive media that's experienced in the first person. And so this might sound simple, but this is actually a pretty big change, and it's a change that's now we can now deploy at a consumer scale. But this change really is about changing the role of the user from an outsider who's looking in at content, images, documents, videos, to an insider who's experiencing digital information all around them. It could be fully simulated worlds like we see on some of the marketing videos where people are interacting as avatars. They might look cartoonish. It can also be the real world embellished with virtual content, augmented reality. And so the metaverse can be all around us throughout our entire day, from morning till night, when it's embellishing the real world. And so the key thing in terms of what's new, and especially when it comes to dangers, is there's nothing new or dangerous about the technology itself. What's dangerous is the extreme power that metaverse platforms could have over populations. And what's primarily new is that we're now getting close to that being possible. So I've been working on these technologies for 30 years, and it's really only been over the last 5 years where it's really been clear that large platforms could be deployed, called the metaverse, and these large platforms could be controlled by corporations, they could be controlled by state actors, and they could track billions of users throughout their day, everything they do during their day, and then manipulate the world around them to impart targeted influence. And that's the key thing to understand about the metaverse, is that it is immersive. You as a user are sinking yourself into someone else's world, and that someone else, whether it's a corporation or a state actor, can not just track you, but can actually change the world around you. And that's a recipe for danger. And this targeted influence that they can put around you could be advertising. That's why they're pushing in that direction, but it also could be propaganda, ideology, manipulation, disinformation. And so these dangers are in some sense familiar, because we've seen these problems already exist in social media. But I would argue that without regulation, the metaverse could be 1,000 times worse. And I think it's helpful actually to just compare to social media, because we're familiar with those dangers, right? And we're familiar with it in a way that's interesting, which is that when social media first hit the scene, it was very much viewed as a utopian technology. We firmly believed it would democratize the world, give a voice to the voiceless, and it's done those things. Like, those are real things that have happened. But now we also have this dystopian reality of social media, where it's driven polarization, misinformation, disinformation, extremism. And again, it's not the technology of social media that did this, it's the business models. And so the business models for social media is really, the way I like to describe it, it's really about tracking, profiling, and targeting users. That's what social media companies are experts at. That's how they make their money. They track what people do online, they profile those people, and then they sell access to those people through targeted influence, and they compete with each other to see who can sell the most effective targeted influence. And I would argue that without regulation, the metaverse very likely to adopt the same business model, but can be much worse. And just to kind of round out why is this actually worse than social media? Just think about it this way. In terms of tracking and profiling, what social media can track, they can track where you click, they can track what you buy, they can track who your friends are, they can do that over time, build up profiles. In the metaverse, they'll be able to track where you go, what you do, who you're with, and not just in these virtual worlds, but also in the real world, in augmented reality. They'll be able to track what direction you're looking, how long your gaze lingers. I could be walking down the street in a virtual world or an augmented world, and a platform could be tracking, where am I walking? Where do I slow down? What store windows do I look in? How long does my gaze linger? They could track my gait, the speed of my gait. They could track my posture and infer my emotions from my posture. They can track my facial expressions. Meta just launched a headset with facial tracking. They can track my vocal inflections. They can potentially monitor my vital signs, heart rate, respiration rate, blood pressure, all to infer my emotions. And so in the metaverse, we're building a world that could essentially monitor your whole life, what you do, what you say, what you experience, and potentially what you feel while doing it. And so this is definitely a privacy concern, but I would express that it's actually more than that. And I would say that because in the metaverse, advertising and propaganda influence, the targeted influence that these platforms can then do with all of these profiles they can build, it's not going to be flat media. It's going to be immersive media. It's not going to be simple pop-up ads and videos. It's going to be promotional experiences. And so we're heading towards a world where platforms could track everything that people are doing, track exactly how they feel while doing it, and then in real time, change the world around them by imparting promotional experiences. And so, I actually think it's helpful to give an example of what that could actually be like. And so, let's say I'm walking down the street in the metaverse, could be virtual or augmented. I could pass a young couple having a conversation. They're talking about some great new restaurant they went to, or some new car they just bought, or some new movie they just saw, whatever. And I overhear maybe 20 seconds of this conversation, and then our paths diverge. And I could be influenced by this exchange. I believe it was an authentic encounter among other people in this world. What I don't realize is that it was a targeted promotional experience that was injected into my surroundings on behalf of a third party. The age, gender, ethnicity, clothing, speaking style of that virtual couple was all chosen by AI to maximize its influence on me based on my profile data collected about me over time. Even the dialogue between that couple was custom crafted based on my personal interests, my values, my personality. In fact, the dialogue could be adjusting itself in real time based on my detected facial expressions, my pupil dilation, my heart rate. And so this could influence me deeply. And without guardrails, I might not even realize that it was a targeted promotional experience. I might think it was authentic, serendipitous. That's the power of immersive worlds. Targeted influence will be subtle experiences, not pop-up ads or videos. And it won't just be for product marketing. It could be propaganda, ideology, disinformation, anything. That's dangerous. And that's why we really need to take the metaverse seriously and really think about putting guardrails in place to protect consumers.
Are there companies that don't follow this business model that are creating metaverse platforms?
That's a great point. And the issue that actually is both a positive and a negative is that the metaverse is in a formative stage. Large platforms exist. They have not finalized their business models yet. Their business models are evolving. They're exploring different business models. And so there is still hope that the world will go in a direction where the business models are not based on tracking, profiling, and targeting users. There's, in fact, we're still at a stage where regulation and policy can actually influence the market. That said, one of the major platforms just announced that they're getting into immersive advertising, and again, I don't think of any of these platforms as evil or as trying to do anything negative. I think that they're trying to do their best. But just last month, Roblox, which is a large immersive metaverse for children, they have 50 million kids on their platform. They had their quarterly earnings, and I think they disappointed Wall Street, and then they immediately announced that starting in 2023, they will launch immersive advertising. I'm not picking on them. I think that that's what every company will do when they realize that they're under pressure to show revenue inside the metaverse, unless there's regulation that says, hey, we should put guardrails in place. There are things that maybe we shouldn't do. Maybe we shouldn't have immersive advertising to children. I mean, I'm especially worried about that because the thing about the virtual reality and augmented reality is the whole purpose is to blur the boundaries between what's real and what's not real, right? The whole purpose is to be able to create these experiences that you can't distinguish from something. You can create an engineered experience and you could be indistinguishable from any other experience. And when advertising goes in that direction, it will be very hard for adults to tell the difference between an authentic experience with some other person in the metaverse and a targeted promotional experience in the metaverse. For kids, that's even harder. Kids already have a hard time telling the difference between what's real and what's not real. And so when I think about immersive advertising, I gave the example of walking by and hearing a couple having a conversation, and I think it's real, but really it was engineered to influence me based on my profile. Well, in the metaverse, there will also be virtual spokespeople that actually directly engage me in conversation, in promotional conversation. So in the metaverse, again, not going to be flat advertisements. It's going to be immersive, and immersive experiences combined with AI means that there will be conversational agents that engage you in promotional conversation and with the goal of influencing you. Now, that's going to be hard for adults to handle. I mean, imagine if you're engaged in a conversation and there's an AI agent, looks like anyone else in the metaverse. You can't tell the difference. Sounds like anyone else. It was actually chosen, the look of that artificial agent was actually chosen based on your profile to be, particularly appealing to you. Age, gender, everything about it, their voice, speaking style, and it engages you in conversation about some new car or some new product or whatever it is. And imagine that it has access to your history, your profile, how you interact, how you act in prior situations. It has access to your hobbies and interests, and so crafting this conversation based on that. And imagine that it has access in real time to your facial expressions and vocal inflections. And so as you're interacting with this conversational agent, talking about a car, and it says something about the performance of the car, and it sees that your pupils change their size a little bit, and suddenly it adjusts its conversational tactics. And it's looking at the micro expressions on your face and adjusting its conversational tactics. It can be the most persuasive tool that we could possibly imagine. Now imagine that it's your kid, and that conversational agent is a big fluffy teddy bear that walks up to you, and it walks up to you, and it's it's laughing, and it's pretending to be your friend, and it's telling you about this new cereal that you love. And again, it's not just a scripted video that a kid would watch on TV. I mean, already kids can get manipulated by traditional advertising, but this is going to be interactive. It's this big teddy bear could be following the kid around, learns its name, learns the kid's name. It could even be adjusting to the kid's emotions in real time. Like, what chance do we have, forget about kids, adults, if you're in a world where a third party can track everything you do, track everything you feel, and then manipulate the world around you, including injecting artificial intelligent agents that look and sound like other people and are designed to be persuasive. I mean, in terms of AI, we can build AI systems that can beat the world's best chess players and poker players and Go players. And what chance does a consumer have engaged in a conversational experience in the metaverse with an AI controlled agent that has access to your history and your preferences and your tendencies? This whole, has a behavioral profile that's been built up about you. It has an emotional profile that's been built up about you. And it's reading your facial expressions and blood pressure in real time and adjusting its tactics. I think we have no chance to. We as consumers, we as humans need special protections in the metaverse that are different than any prior form of advertising, because it's immersive and it's interactive and it's real time, and those are new things. And policymakers really need to understand that we're going to someplace very new and very different, and the dangers are significantly amplified.
I really appreciate your perspective here. I think it's very important that our audience understand the problem is the business model and the threats to human autonomy and human rights. But as you know, the US has been very reluctant to regulate data-driven technologies because of the threats to innovation, and more recently, the threats to national security. So how do you think, I'm going to ask you some specifics about your the articles that you wrote, which we linked to in the invitation, but what you recommend. But first, you are arguing for regulation right now, and yet we can't even regulate AI.
Yes. So, and I have conversations with policymakers regularly all around the world, and I get a common comment that I get not just in the U.S. everywhere, which is, "Hey, we're still struggling to figure out how to regulate social media, still struggling to figure out how to regulate AI. How do we, how can we think about the metaverse?" And my response, especially when it comes to social media, is that it took so long before regulators actually focused on social media that the business models were firmly entrenched. And so to impart regulation, a decade too late was really, it can guarantee that industry is going to fight that. The metaverse is in a very different state. The metaverse is in a state where the business models have not solidified, and the metaverse is in a different state, in that we can learn from social media. We can learn from an example of a technology where it really had utopian vision, and it went to a direction where we see dystopian results. I think there was a survey that was done, I think by Pew Research. It said that I think 67% of Americans think that that social media is damaging to society, right? Like, who wants to run a business where 67% of your customers think that your business is damaging to society? I don't think that anybody wanted to end up there. I don't think it was engineered to end up there. I think that we collectively just stumbled into that place, and we waited a decade too long to think about putting guardrails in place. And so that industry has lost trust. And so that experience, plus the fact that the business models are not established, should make regulators and policymakers think, hey, we have a chance to do this right. We have a chance to put regulation and guardrails in place early, before the business models have set up. And the industry has a chance to say, hey, we really would like the world to trust this new technology, and trust. And the thing is, if people feel like they enter the metaverse and they can't tell the difference between, serendipitous experience or, for example, a virtual product placement. They see something in the metaverse, they think, imagine you're walking down the street in the metaverse and you see, somebody drinking a particular brand of soft drink, and you go, you notice it, and you keep walking down the street and you see somebody else and think, wow, that's popular. And then you find out later, no, that was engineered, that was targeted at you. You're the only one who saw that. It was based on your profile. Well, you're now not going to trust that world. In fact, you can lose trust in the entire platform. And so guardrails that would say, hey, you can't do that, would protect trust for the industry. It would protect consumers. And I think most importantly, it would actually help the industry, because they wouldn't have to compete with each other. I mean, the thing about having run multiple companies during my career in these spaces, I understand that companies can have good intentions. They don't want to, take their technology in a certain direction, but as soon as their competitors start doing that, they have no choice. They have to compete. And so in the metaverse, you could easily imagine, everyone says, we shouldn't use heart rate and blood pressure and micro expressions and pupil dilation for interactive advertising. I think the public, I don't think we all can agree, the public does not want a third party to use real-time changes in their heart rate to make optimized advertisements. So, but as soon as the first company does that, well, now there's pressure on all the other companies to match, because they have something that advertisers will pay a little bit more for. But if there were guardrails in place, then the companies would know, hey, that's off limits, and they wouldn't have to go there. And I actually think companies would appreciate that. I mean, they're not getting into the metaverse for the reason of becoming, creating the most persuasive interactive advertisements that the world has ever seen. That's not what got any of their employees excited about the metaverse. But that's where they will go unless there's guardrails that say that can't be your business model. And if it's not, then the companies can compete on just making the best experiences for consumers, for making the metaverse the best possible place. And consumers will go to the places where they have the best educational experiences and shopping experiences and social experiences and entertainment experiences like that. The metaverse platforms can compete on all those benefits if they all know, hey, these, what could be these very persuasive, predatory, and deceptive forms of manipulation are just off limits.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question. We appreciate there's some questions in the Q&A, and we're going to get to them in a second. Please keep putting them in there. Okay, so you've argued for the delineation of new rights to protect users. And one right you suggest is the right to experiential authenticity. But I wonder, how can governments mandate authenticity when they can't even agree as to what's disinformation? So you're asking for a new approach to governing. Could you talk a little about that?
Sure. So when I talk about the rights that I think people should, the basic rights people should have in the metaverse, in immersive worlds, and there's really three things I mentioned. One is the right not to be profiled behaviorally. Again, these platforms can watch everything everybody's doing. They need to actually have that information in real time, but they don't necessarily have to store that information over time. So the first thing is just behavioral profiling. I think we should have a right to behavioral privacy in the metaverse, because without it, platforms could document everything you do and then build up these models where they can actually then predict what you're going to do in almost every situation. The second thing is emotional privacy, and emotional privacy, because again, these platforms, now that they can look at your pupil dilation and eye motion and heart rate and blood flow patterns on your face, they can document how you feel during every interaction during your day in the metaverse, and they could build up these emotional profiles, and then these emotional profiles could then be used again to manipulate you. They could predict what stimulus is going to create the correct emotion in that particular person. So those are two. The third is what I would talk about, the right to experiential authenticity. And that's the one that's really the most unique to the metaverse. And when I talk about, guaranteeing that your experiences are authentic, I'm actually not talking about content moderation. I'm not saying that the experiences are factually correct. I'm saying authentic experiences are real interactions in this world that's been created around you that are what they appear to be. They're serendipitous interactions. They're not engineered experiences, promotional experiences that are targeted at you. And so a good way to explain, an inauthentic experience. Imagine in today's world, like in the real world, imagine if you went into a store, Best Buy, and imagine if they hired actors to pretend to be other customers. And you're walking around the aisles in Best Buy and you overhear some other customers talking, but they're really actors, you don't know that. They might even engage you in conversation. They're really actors that you don't know that. And those actors have access to, history about you. So they're they've been well primed to engage you and to manipulate you. And like, we would consider that to be predatory. We would consider that to be deceptive. We would consider that having crossed the line from marketing to manipulation. And I would say that that's not an authentic experience. Now, that's not scalable in the real world, so we're not really worried about that. But in the metaverse, it's not only scalable, it's probably the most efficient way to influence people, because the power that the platforms have is that they can modify the world, and they can put AI agents into the world, and they can profile you. And so the right to experiential authenticity, to me, is if that happened in the metaverse. Let's just say that I'm in the metaverse and I'm walking around a Best Buy in the metaverse, and it's virtual, or I'm sitting in a coffee house in the metaverse, and somebody engages me in conversation, or I overhear a conversation, or I see a car drive by that I think is just drove by, but it's actually was, if any of those things were targeted, if a third party put that into the world, for me to overhear or to engage me in conversation, or for me to just see a car drive by and nobody else is seeing it. I'm just seeing it because it's a targeted advertisement. If that's an engineered experience that was targeted at me by a third party, a sponsor, could be a state actor, but if that happens, like, there should be rules in place to say that those experiences have to look different. They have to sound different. Meaning, if somebody engages me in promotional conversation, if that agent looks different, sounds different, at least I know that it's an advertisement. If I see a car drive by and it's really a virtual product placement, if it looks different, at least I know it's an advertisement. And that's to me, really the big difference is that in today's world, most adults pretty much know what's an advertisement and what's not an advertisement. There are some blurry boundaries, but if you see, you're not, if you see a billboard, okay, that's an advertisement. A pop-up ad, that's an advertisement. In the metaverse, advertisements will be experiences. We will not know the difference. If there are guardrails in place that say that anything that is a targeted promotional experience, an engineered experience aimed at you to influence you, that it has to just look different. Before we even get to the content, it just has to look different. So that it's engineered. You could at least now bring your natural skepticism. You can bring your natural ability to say, hey, maybe this is misinformation. Maybe this is, people in this world aren't really all drinking Red Bull. Like this was engineered for me to experience. And that's why I think authenticity is so important, and why, or at least the ability to, if something's not authentic, it should be distinguishable, because otherwise in the metaverse, people will not know what they can trust and what was put there potentially on behalf of a sponsor just to influence them. And they might not even know that other people around them aren't even seeing the same thing.
Okay, we have a ton of questions. So let's begin. All right, the first question relates to state level privacy laws. And so I'm sure you're familiar with California's, and every state is different, but what would you add to those laws? Biometric regulations? So
to me, the biggest risk is, going back to on the issue of privacy, we're really thinking about what information is being tracked about people. And in the metaverse, it's behavioral information and emotional information. I do think the emotional information is actually the more dangerous part. And I think biometrics is the more dangerous part. The thing that's really tricky about the metaverse is that all of this information, while it's really scary, it also has positive uses, right? And so like heart rate, blood pressure, respiration rate, for a medical experience in the metaverse has real value. For an exercise experience in the metaverse has real value. Similarly, facial tracking. Meta just launched the ability to track your facial expressions in the metaverse and your eye motions in the metaverse. Both of those can really deeply infer your emotions in real time. They're not doing it to be evil. They're doing it because if they can track your emotions in real time, your avatar in the metaverse can express emotions. It actually humanizes the metaverse. It has this positive benefit that it humanizes the metaverse. So it's not that we want to say you can't do it. So we have to be really clear and say, well, what can you use that data for? I would say that anything promotional, using biometric data for anything promotional, any kind of engineered experience that's intended to influence you, is really, really dangerous. And it becomes even more dangerous if that information can be stored over time. And so I would say that storage of emotional data over time is really dangerous, because it allows these platforms to profile people. And by profiling people, I mean they could know exactly how an individual reacts emotionally, physiologically, to thousands of experiences throughout their day. And these are subtle experiences. Walking down the street, glance in a store window, keep walking, and they know that your blood pressure, had a slight change. Like those scenarios are, are very doable in the metaverse unless there's restrictions in place. And so restrictions, so I would define, real-time behavioral and emotional data and stored behavioral and emotional data. I would say real-time data needs to have very strict regulations on what it can be used for, and regulations that it cannot be used in real time for interactive promotional experiences, for essentially manipulating people by adjusting advertisements in real time, adjusting influence in real time based on how you're acting. And then I don't believe that these behavioral and emotional data should be stored over time. Platforms should not be allowed to create behavioral profiles or emotional profiles, because it is so dangerous, especially with AI, because that data, you can run machine learning on this data, and a behavioral emotional profile will turn into a behavioral or emotional predictive model. And that's what an engineer would do. Say, I can create a predictive model so that this advertisement knows what to do to evoke the desired emotion. And so it's dangerous, but at the same time, there's positive uses. And to really separate the positive uses from the dangers, policymakers need to really understand the dangers, and then put some guardrails in place that preserve the benefits, but just protect against the most dangerous downsides. And to me, the most dangerous downsides are manipulation, the ability for real-time manipulation is extreme, and because these are interactive places. It's not like social media. I think it's worth expressing that, because in social media, dangers exist, but they're profiling you over time, and they hit you with something once, and then they hit you again, and so it's this kind of slow process. It's very dangerous. In the metaverse, they could be adapting every 200 milliseconds. They could be looking at, the blood pattern on your face and adjusting your conversation. It's the real-time manipulation. It actually starts to go towards, cognitive influence, like mind control, and it is really dangerous.
Can you talk about the difference between, our question is about the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality, and which is more dangerous?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So virtual reality is fully simulated worlds. It's what most people think of when they hear metaverse, because you see these, cartoonish spaces with, cartoonish avatars, and people interact. And I do believe that, these fully virtual spaces will become more popular for socializing and for shopping and for other kind of short-term experiences. But my personal view is that 10 years from now, when we think about the metaverse, it will really be mostly an augmented reality experience. And by that, I mean, an augmented reality, it's the real world. You can see the real world. You're wearing lightweight glasses that you can see through. And then there's virtual content all around you. And the reason I really deeply believe that augmented reality will be what most people think of the metaverse is because when you're in a purely virtual world cut off from the real world, it's fun for entertainment or for short-term experiences, but people don't like to be cut off from the real world for extended periods. Augmented reality, you're not leaving the real world, you're not leaving your real life, we're just embellishing it. And we can embellish it in amazing ways with informative content, with artistic content. And so, I like to think of it as, augmented metaverse is really the direction that the mobile phone industry is going, right? People have a mobile phone in their hand from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep. It's how they interact with their digital world throughout their day. They might take some time and watch TV or go online, but the phone is their basic connection to the digital world. I believe that that's essentially evolving into glasses, and they'll be very lightweight glasses. They'll be stylish, and now content will be everywhere. And so you can easily imagine a world 10 years from now where people are immersed in an augmented world from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep. And you can even imagine a world where we look back on today when you see people walking down the street with their head bent, staring down at a little phone and think, oh, that's ridiculous. Like that's how people used to interact with information. Whereas in 10 years, people, it's just the information is just everywhere. It's natural, it's intuitive, it's actually in a form that we're meant to perceive our world. And so I really do believe that will be the metaverse that transforms society most of all. From that perspective, it's potentially more dangerous. It's potentially more dangerous because it will impact people's lives throughout their day. It's also potentially more dangerous because it's tracking people throughout their daily routines. These systems will know, again, where you are in the real world, who you're with in the real world, where you're looking in the real world, and potentially even know, how your heart rate's changing in the real world. So, I do think that these same issues exist in both worlds. I mean, there are other dangers in virtual worlds that are maybe more significant because you are fully immersed. Things like bullying and harassment in fully virtual worlds are uniquely dangerous because people feel immersed, feels very real, and yet people could be not who they appear to be in a fully virtual world. And so we have more significant identity theft issues and bullying and harassment and person-on-person, whereas in the augmented world where people are physically present, I think people will behave better because it's part of the real world. We have a culture in the real world where we behave well, and I think that will translate to augmented reality. There is a culture in fully anonymous online worlds that people behave poorly, and that's a separate significant danger of the metaverse, fully virtual metaverse, and that will come down to identity protections and that are may or may not be part of government policy. I think the industry itself has a lot of motivation to control that.
Okay, so building on that, we have an interesting question here. Given how challenging and lengthy regulation is in the United States, is there anything the tech industry should do to self-regulate, and is that even possible?
So I do think it's possible, but it is hard to count on. I also do think it's in the best interest of the tech industry, because the last thing they want is for this entire space to get tainted where people don't trust it. And so I think that there are opportunities for the industry to have self-regulation. There are some efforts underway to push in that direction, but again, very, very difficult to predict if that will really be meaningful, even if things are put on paper. Are there really any consequences of if companies don't abide by their own self-regulation? So there's lots of issues there. The single best thing that the industry could do is make a conscious decision to go away from the tracking and profiling and targeting business model that was adopted for social media. And again, I don't blame the industry. I don't think that these companies were evil and said, let's take social media down a dark path. I think that we all collectively went down that path. Consumers didn't want to pay subscriptions for social media access. Consumers were very happy to accept being advertised to, and were maybe not that clear. Consumers maybe didn't realize how much they were being tracked and profiled. But we all went down this path. In the metaverse, we have the benefit of that history, and we also have the benefit of knowing that tracking and profiling and targeting will be so much more intimate than in today's social media, that it is more dangerous. And so, can metaverse platforms go down a path of completely different business models? It's absolutely possible. there are new business models that can happen in the metaverse that are based on commerce inside of those worlds, as opposed to targeted marketing and advertising. That's an option. Subscription models are still a potential for metaverse platforms. There could be metaverse platforms that say, hey, we're going to be subscription based, no tracking, no targeting, no marketing. It's going to be a safe world. There's a good business case for that, but can we count on it? I don't think so. And again, we're already seeing economic pressures pushing metaverse platforms towards in some of these directions. So it could end up being a combination of the industry pushing itself in a direction of trust, which I really think should be their mantra, which is we want customers to trust these worlds or they won't come. And I also think governments can put guardrails in place that protect companies from having to compete with other companies and push each other into really dangerous directions.
Thank you. I've never heard this question before, so this is fascinating to me. Can you talk about bystander privacy? Seems like it's unavoidable that augmented reality will capture the data of non-users, and there's no feasible way to consent.
That's a real issue. It was anytime you're putting, especially cameras on a person, it raises these huge issues. And so it goes back to when Google launched their Google Glass, which wasn't even really augmented reality, but it was more of a smart glasses, and it had a camera, and there was outrage that, hey, people are walking around with a camera, and that creates this privacy issue. Now, that was a different time. When Google Glass came out, was not the same time as today, when you can't walk down the street and see people with 20 people with cell phones aiming them in every possible direction. So we're being desensitized to these issues because just with today's mobile phones, if you're in a public space, cameras are everywhere. They're pointed in every direction. And these augmented reality devices will have, similar capabilities. They're just worn. I know there was Meta was testing some glasses, and they had a little light on it that if it was recording, if the camera was on, the light would be on, and that's their defense, was to say, well, if the light's on, and then somebody just covered over the light, and again, it created this controversy. So it's a very difficult issue, and I think it's almost unstoppable just because of the current culture and climate around just traditional mobile phones. Cameras are everywhere, and people would be equally outraged if there were restrictions saying you can't record in a public place.
Getting back to our questioner asked, could you speak a bit more about the impact on behavior decisions that affect the political sphere? What concerns you most?
Yeah, so all of the same issues that we worry about today in the world of social media and other forms of manipulation are just more dangerous in the metaverse. And again, it's the reason is that we're going from simple content to experiences. And so imagine I'm wearing augmented reality glasses and I'm walking down the street in the real world, and maybe I'm walking down the street and I see all kinds of political content on that street. I see advertisements for particular candidates, particular policies, particular ideologies, and I might think, oh, my community really supports the same ideas that I do, and I might not realize that the person walking next to me has a different profile and is seeing a completely different political landscape on the same street. And so, while social media drives us into our own information bubbles, virtual reality, augmented reality could drive us into our own just completely separate realities. Like right now, when you go out into the physical world, it's one of the last bastions of an actual public sphere where we're sharing the same space. When we're out in the real world and we're not looking at a phone, we're actually sharing the same reality for a minute. Augmented reality can make that go away, where there's no longer a place where we have a same shared reality. So it's the same dangers, but much worse. And again, if there was some guardrails in place that said, hey, I'm not going to be deceived into thinking that everybody is seeing this, because I think there's some of this content is targeted at me and it looks different. So I know, hey, other people are going to see something different. That's the first step at least making sure people know when they are in an engineered reality, as opposed to just an authentic serendipitous reality. Because the authentic reality would be that you're walking down the street and there's virtual content, but it's a mix of whoever actually lives there is putting that content out there, and it's not engineered for me. It's what everybody is seeing, and so it is actually a public sphere, as opposed to this siloed targeted content. And it's possible the metaverse could go in this direction, could save us from the siloed content of social media if we have guardrails in place that say you can't silo people that way. Everyone, and if you do, things should look different, so what is a targeted experience versus a representative experience.
Building on that question, another questioner says, we already see people deplatformed, but in the metaverse, a friend could be removed and you're speaking to a duplicate. So the friend is a fake, and so neither even know they have been intermediated. A person is thus silenced, but no one knows they've been silenced. In AR, you can remove that person from view and literally silence them in their headphones. Can you speak a bit about this kind of censorship?
I worry about it. I worry about it, and there's really two different issues in that question. One goes to identity theft, if you replace somebody with somebody else, and it could be bad actors doing that. The other is a form of censorship. In augmented reality, I written some articles about what I would call reality blocking, which is, what if based on your profile, there's just things in the real world you don't see. Maybe you don't want to see homeless people, and you're just not going to see them. They're going to be blocked out. And so your world has been altered, or maybe it wasn't even your choice. Maybe, it was done for you, or you don't want to see whatever. And so the ability to influence not just what you see, not what is virtually presented, but the parts of the real world can also be obscured, again, is dangerous. If somebody is deplatformed in the metaverse, would they be replaced by somebody else, by an actual official, by an actual corporate platform? Unlikely, because that really is identity theft. But bad actors, I worry a lot about bad actors basically being able to replicate somebody that coworker, friend, a family member, and that person could look exactly like the person sound exactly like the person engage you in conversation for the purpose of corporate espionage, for the purpose of a phishing attack to get your bank accounts or some other personal information. And so, one of the explicit dangers of the metaverse is that it's a technology where the people that you're interacting with might not actually be the people they look and sound like, unless there's really, really strict identity protections where and I think that's going to become something that the platforms are going to have to guarantee that, that could be a competitive playing field for why you would trust a platform versus another platform. One of the most basic things is the person you're interacting with who they say they are. And it's especially important for kids, because for kids, they could be interacting with another kid, but it's really an adult. And that is, especially dangerous. And platforms already are already dealing with those issues, and they work hard to solve those issues when kids are involved. But these issues are going to get more and more significant as these worlds get more and more realistic.
Given the abuses on social media, our questioner asks, especially against women and LGBTQ people, are there any thoughts on how we address access to redress?
I mean, so all of the abuses that we see in social media, we have to assume will translate into the metaverse. And if the abuses that we generally see, for the most part, I think, are because of anonymity. People behave really, really poorly on social media, and they wouldn't act that way if you actually met them in real life, face to face. They're doing that because they feel anonymous and they also feel distant. Now, the metaverse is this scary thing where at some point they will look real, and so all of these issues, that we face in social media will be a lot more impactful and personal if somebody is bullying you or demeaning you in person, face to face, like it's as if they're really there, which really begs the issue of like, well, what's going to make people behave more like the real world in the metaverse? Because the impacts are more like the real world. The feeling that we'll have to people will be more like the real world. Part of that is pushing for a positive culture in the metaverse, and there's a lot of people who push for that. I am, again, you can't predict how that will evolve. I do think that identity, if people have persistent identity in the metaverse, you really know who they are, and so they feel like they have some self-responsibility the way they do in the real world. I think that more than anything would push that space towards more civil interactions.
That would be great. Okay, we have time for one last question, which is, has the FTC expressed any interest in specifically and proactively regulating metaverse platforms?
So the FTC has put out requests for comment, and they generally don't just restrict it specifically to quote the metaverses. But they do have requests for comments that are in areas that overlap a lot of these issues in the metaverse, and so they absolutely are collecting information about the dangers of the metaverse or the potential dangers, and so we can be hopeful that they're looking at it and focused on it, and I think their stance is generally looking at actual current harms, and that's the danger, is that they're so focused on current harms that they might not be focused on the harms that could just be a couple years away, and because it takes time to put these protections in place, I think that would be, to me, the best thing that regulators could do is just starting to be more proactive, because once these bad practices get put into place, everything just gets harder to undo.
Do you have any final summary comments that you'd like to give to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, my view is that there's a lot. When you hear the word metaverse, there's a lot of skepticism out there. There's a lot of bashing of different companies. The metaverse is not any one company, and I really do think that the best way to think of the metaverse is this transition to immersive media that has all these dangers associated with it. I do think it will be virtual and augmented, and I do think that 10 years from now it will be a very significant part of our life, and it does give platform providers extreme power, and there's all kinds of benefits and there's all kinds of good things that the metaverse can do, but we need to really think about the extreme power that it can give to a third party that can watch everything that billions of people are doing and then change the world around them. That's a recipe for a really dangerous situation, unless there's some guardrails in place.
So that is really, really helpful. The problem is the business model. We need guardrails. And let me ask you one more thing. If we have a bunch of questions that come in afterwards, can we email them to you? Because I have a feeling people want to sit on this and may have more to ask, or can we call on you again?
Absolutely. So if you have questions, you can send, and if we want to do another webinar, we could do that as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenberg, and thank you to our audience. And we are going to do a series on the relationship between emerging data-driven tech and democracy, both in the process of governance and its effect on our ability to democratically call for our rights. So this has been extremely helpful to understanding those relationships. Thank you so much. And thank you to our co-organizers. Everybody have a great day. Thank
Thanks.
you.